Greetings and a warm welcome to the debate on Press TV. I'm your host, Theresa. The meeting between British Prime Minister and President of the European Commission on Wednesday produced a 26-page text of a political declaration on a draft agreement on Britain's future trade and security ties with the European Union. Now, it is supposed to be signed at a summit on Sunday. Theresa May says that it is the right deal for Britain and is within grasp, while opposition Labour Party leader calls it waffle and a botched deal lacking any clarity. Now, what will be the fate of Brexit? Who will benefit from it? What are the chances of a no deal and its ramifications? Let's now go to London and get an update from Press TV's Robert Carter about the reactions to the declaration. Robert, over to you.
Thank you very much. Well, basically, as we've already established over the last couple of weeks of debates in the House of Commons, many MPs remain deeply sceptical about the agreement. Now, this 26-page political declaration is not to be confused with the 585-page withdrawal agreement deal, which was also agreed upon earlier on and has yet to be accepted by the British Parliament. The political declaration actually sets out what the relationship will be like after Britain has left the European Union bloc, and the terms of how the UK is going to leave the European Union bloc is agreed upon in the larger withdrawal agreement deal, the 585-page deal. Now, what is going to be agreed on over the weekend is going to please Theresa May, of course. It's certainly pleasing the European Union, but many MPs in the House of Commons from both sides of the political spectrum remain deeply concerned, and there are still some major sticking issues, which leads us to wonder why Theresa May is agreeing this deal with the European Union at this stage, when perhaps it would have been more pragmatic of her to have gone to her own House of Parliament first and got them to agree to it, because as it stands, many MPs, including some Tory MPs, including former Brexit Secretary Dominic Raab and former Foreign Minister Boris Johnson, they've said quite plainly that they won't be backing the deal, they will rebel against it, and even the opposition leaders such as Jeremy Corbyn of the Labour Party and the Scottish National Party as well have said that they don't agree with the deal and that it doesn't offer the Brexit that many British people are hoping for. So Theresa May now has to push this plan forward, and what a lot of people are saying is that the political declaration makes clear that she wants the trading relationship with the EU to be incredibly close after Brexit happens, and also that the transition period, which is due to end in 2020, could be extended should they not reach a deal. And during that period, including the extension, Britain will still be paying into the European Union, and we're talking about billions of pounds here. So a lot of people are saying now that the agreement that Theresa May is about to sign with the European Union is not given the Brexit which Britain voted for, and that is the real question. Is it or is it not?
Okay, thank you for that update. That was Robert Carver, our correspondent in London. Now let me introduce the guests who will be joining me to do the debate today. We have investigating journalist Tony Gosling, who is joining us from Bristol, and also journalist and commentator James Tweedy out of London. Now let me start with James Tweedy. Theresa May has hailed the draft agreement as right for the whole UK that would lead to, quote, brighter future. Now, what do you think about the document?
Well, firstly, I don't think anyone's happy with it. It's not going to get the support of those who don't want us to leave the EU, and it's not going to get the support of those who do. The party support it in Parliament because the Labour Party wants to make trouble for the government. And so, no, it doesn't deliver, and I don't think it delivers really on the spirit of the referendum that we had in this country 2 years either.
All right, Tony Gosling, what do you think? Do you agree that it will lead to a brighter future for Great Britain?
Well, no, I don't. I mean, Theresa May has got a very difficult job here because she is being pulled between two sides. One side, the EU, who really don't want to give Britain a good deal at all. And then on the other side, she's got an entire population, the majority of which voted to leave the European Union. Now, they do not want, I mean, it's like the Hotel California in the famous American song by the Eagles. You know, you can check out any time you like, but you can never leave. Now, this was referring, in the original song, was referring to actually to cults in California at the time. But what it's like, the EU, is it's like a ratchet. You only go in one direction. Now, there's lots of people that are becoming controlled by Brussels, you know, that are wanting to join because of the economic benefits. But once they're entangled with the EU system, which is actually a cartel system, it's run by big business, you find it very difficult to get any of your sovereignty back, to claw it back. You've got to try extremely hard. So, no, it's not, I don't think, a good deal for Britain. And the main reason for that is that it's the backstop in Northern Ireland, which is effectively humiliation, splitting Northern Ireland off from the rest of the United Kingdom.
Yeah, we'll come to that later.
The other thing is, the other major thing is that it's open. It is an open-ended staying in the customs union, which is what effectively means is that the European Court of Justice will continue to have jurisdiction in Britain over much of our trade and industry laws, and that's not Brexit.
Okay. James Tweedy, Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn excoriated the declaration as an empty document and a botched product. Is it really an empty, good-for-nothing document, as Jeremy Corbyn has put it?
Well, let me just say that firstly, I'd like to say Hotel California I thought was about heroin addiction, but yeah, the analogy still stands. But what did Jeremy Corbyn say? Well, okay, who's it good for? Maybe it's good for those who don't really want to leave the European Union. What we have to say is there's a division. There's clearly a division inside the British ruling class, not just in the British electorate, but inside the British ruling class about whether they want to stay in the EU and whether they think globalization is a good thing, and those who don't. And you can see this battle is being played out in other parts of the world, like the USA, which is why Donald Trump was elected. And Theresa May is trying to take a kind of path where we have Brexit in name, but not in deed. And we still we stay, as you know, as my colleague said just now, we stay in the customs union indefinitely with a lot of very, very vague conditions for getting out of it. So, who is it good for? It's good for the globalists. It's good for those who want to stay in the EU, essentially.
Tony Gosling, let's switch to Scotland now. Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has said that the document amounts to a blindfold Brexit. Now, she believes since a lot of difficult issues remain unresolved, an extended transition period or an indefinite Irish backstop that you just mentioned is, quote, almost certain. Do you agree with Nicola Sturgeon?
Well, she could well be right, actually. But let me say it, Nicola Sturgeon is actually a failed politician. She's the leader of the Scottish National Party who completely failed to convince the people of Scotland to leave the United Kingdom. And actually, the evidence is that outside the European Union, Scottish people would vote very strongly to stay within the United Kingdom. In fact, and also the other thing to remember about Nicola is that she's very close to something called the European Council on Foreign Relations. She does talks for them. I'm not sure whether she actually receives funding from them, but ideologically, this is essentially a private US lobby that Nicola Sturgeon is bosom buddies with, right? So we've got to be really, I don't think she's an independent politician at all. She's one of the globalists that's really working for these foreign policy bodies rather than for the ordinary people of Scotland. But look, you asked about Jeremy Corbyn as well just now. I think he has really missed a trick here because the voters here in Britain will not respect his attempt here to get a general election. So he's not actually really listening to what the voters said and trying to get what's the best for Britain and possibly voting with some of the Conservatives and some of Theresa May's people in a vote to pass this, if he agrees with it. He's just seeing this as an opportunistic attempt to try and bring down the government. Whether he succeeds or not, I think he's going to suffer if there is a general election, which obviously there will be in 2012, I believe it is, anyway. But when there's a general election, Corbyn is going to suffer for this, because what he should be doing is he should be allowing his MPs a free vote on their consciences as to whether they support this deal or not trying to force to bring Theresa May down and to have a general election. And I can see why he's doing it. This is politics, but actually it's not what's best for the country, and I think he'll suffer as a result.
Now, let me go to James Studi. James, do you agree with what Tony believes regarding Corbyn and his attempts?
I'm going to say that probably the last thing Jeremy Corbyn wants right now is to be Prime Minister at the end of March, before the Brexit is concluded. Because he's going to be sitting there as Prime Minister, standing there as Prime Minister in front of Parliament with 300 or so dyed-in-the-wool Remainers sitting behind him on the backbenches, on his own backbenches, all sharpening their knives to stab him in the back like they have done twice before anyway, you see? And they'll be saying, no, we must either have another referendum on Brexit with the option of staying in the EU, or we must agree a Brexit deal which is meaningless, so soft as to be meaningless. And let me say that soft Brexit, as they say, is not Brexit at all. And that's not what he thinks. That's not what he wants, and they know that. And so I don't think it's really in his interest to become Prime Minister right now. But he would say, of course, that the government is useless, because this is what you do when you're in opposition. The government is useless, and the government must resign, and they must call a new election. Or even as John McDonnell said today, we don't even need an election if the Tory party, if the government collapses because the DUP withdraws its support for the government. The Queen should invite Jeremy Corbyn to form a new government. I don't even know how that works. I don't even know if that's really constitutional, but there we go. But like I say, he may say all these things, but I don't think it's really in interest.
Now, Tony Gosling, let's now shift gears to Ireland. It's another sticking point in this deal. And this text is saying that the EU is inclined to consider technological solutions to avoid a hard Irish border. Now, what's the best scenario for the Irish border issue, in your opinion?
Well, I think you've just got to have a border there. I mean, there's probably something like 40 or 50 border crossings. When I lived over there, actually, it was what you would call an extremely hard border. I lived on the border, actually, in County Fermanagh in Northern Ireland. And it was while the army was patrolling during the Troubles in the 1990s. In fact, I used to stand in my garden sometimes and find a helicopter come from about 7,000 or 8,000 feet down to 200 feet in my garden. It was an extremely hard border, and it would be very, very simple, I think, just to restore a small border of some sort, just to have basic border checks. But, if you're going to have a separate country, which Northern and Southern Ireland will be, you've got to have a border of some kind. I just think it's been totally unrealistic from the start to try and say that there shouldn't be any kind of border. What they're really trying to do here is to offer a sop to the Southern Irish, who are obviously staying in the European Union. But look, there's been a big change, by the way, over the last couple of days, which is that we were being told for a long time by the Prime Minister that basically it was her deal, which a lot of people are now calling the EU deal, because it does seem as if this is what the EU wanted more than what the British wanted in the negotiations, Barnier's negotiations. So you can either have the EU deal or no deal. That was what we were being told. Now, as of literally the last 24 hours or so, we're now being told that it's either the EU deal or no Brexit. So in other words, that they won't have any kind of Brexit at all, and we may stay in the EU. So these are, we're living in very interesting, dramatic times, but the goalposts are being shifted by Theresa May, and as she does this sort of technique, this tactic to try and say, well, actually, maybe if you don't vote for my deal, well, we'll just stay in the EU, is not doing her credibility any good at all. But anyway, I mean, I think she's toast, really, because this deal is very unlikely to pass through Parliament, and then everyone's going to be pointing the finger at her and saying, what do you think you're doing this deal, which the British members of Parliament simply cannot agree with. You need to, I mean, it's a difficult act that she's done between what the parliamentarians and the British people want and the EU, and maybe it always was an impossible deal to do, because there's only one person that you can really deal with in the European Union, and that is Angela Merkel. The Germans are very much in control, and they are the people that you need to be dealing with. And I've heard that from several people who have been on the inside track over the last 3 or 4 years with dealing with the European Union, including people who spoke to David Cameron when he was trying to get a better deal. This is just before he left, just before the referendum. The only person that will give you anything, any concessions at all, is Merkel. It's a waste of time.
And she's not attending the Sunday summit, looks like it. No, anyway, now let's go to James Tweedy. The French, Dutch and Danish governments are worried about the amount of access to be given to British waters. Now, Prime Minister May told Parliament that fisheries won't be traded off with any other priority. Could a deal resolve the fishing issue in Britain's favour?
Well, I think the danger is here that, I mean, despite the Prime Minister's assurances, the status of the fisheries of British waters, or what Britain can claim as a exclusive economic zone, is still up for negotiation as part of the eventual deal, or the possible way out of the customs union backstop situation, the transitional period. So, of course, British fishing communities will feel betrayed about that. They will be worried that, yes, indeed, it will be traded off. This is something that, while we've been in the EEC and the EU, this is an issue that, because fishing boats from other countries, other EU members, are allowed to fish in our waters and are taking perhaps more of the catch than British trawlermen are. So, and it's the kind of issue. You may say that there are very few people who work in fishing, but it is actually the kind of issue that a very touchstone issue in this country, and it goes down to the reasons. It goes to the heart, to the root of the reasons why people voted to get out of the EU, because it's an attack on our sovereignty, it's an attack on our economy, and people are going to be angry about this. They're going to have a lot of solidarity with the fishermen. Remember when Bob Geldof got on his yacht with his rich friends and they all drank champagne in a protest against Brexit, in a call for people to vote Remain, and the fishermen came and sprayed them with their hoses. Well, that was quite a resonant moment, really, and I think people are going to side with the fishermen on this one.
All right. Now, Tony Gosling, there are concerns about the future of the single market in case the UK could get preferential access to EU markets without having to comply with freedom of movement rules. Now, what are the pros and cons?
Well, one of the things I've heard very few commentators mention here is that what we're really dealing with the what they call the single market is a market in people. So everyone can easily understand goods and services, maybe cars being imported, exported, fruit, vegetables, that sort of thing. But the way the EU views people is just as goods. So if you're importing a person to do a job, they're treated like as if they were commodities. And I think this really explains to people that didn't realise this, the attitude of the EU to people is not very humanitarian. And obviously, one of the main reasons that we've got this free movement of people as well as goods and services, which, by the way, we never actually agreed to when Britain had a vote back in the 1970s to join the European Economic Community. It wasn't about free movement of people. It is actually, the idea is to supply cheap labour to the wealthier parts of Europe from the poorer parts of Europe. And so what you've seen is migrants from outside Europe coming in all around the fringes of Europe, and them coming to work as cheap labour. Now, I'm not saying that refugees, for example, shouldn't be given asylum. Of course they should. But this is really, again, an evidence that the EU is working for big business. This is what big business wants. This is what the banksters want, really, is to have cheap labour come in. And as a result, that's what we've seen. And I think, obviously, that's a major reason why people voted for Brexit, is because they want to have people coming into the country who are not just there to undercut pay and conditions of people who've worked very hard over the centuries here to get good jobs, well-paid jobs, and that the bosses can't just sack them at the drop of a hat.
Okay.
That's one of the main reasons people voted for Brexit.
All right, James Tweedy, the one last question, answer it very briefly, regarding Spain. It's insisting it will want to agree to the deal unless changes are made to it. And May says she is sure that Spain will sign it. How can the Gibraltar dispute affect the deal? Very briefly, please.
Well, I believe Spain's objection is that the status of Gibraltar, or the future status of Gibraltar, would not be decided bilaterally between Spain and the UK, which they want, but would be subject to negotiations in Brussels, possibly the whole post-Brexit negotiations. I mean, that's understandable. Of course, Spain wants to. Spain, it considers that part of its territory, or form part of its territory, and it wants to settle the issue directly with Britain. I think that bilaterality is an interesting thing, though. That's a good question, because you mentioned Ireland. Ireland has a bilateral common travel area. Yeah, with the UK going back 100 years, and that I don't see why that's a problem to maintain that after Brexit.
Okay, on that note, we'll come to the end of this debate. I should thank our guests. We had investigative journalist Tony Gosling from Bristol and journalist and commentator James Tweedy from London. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us in this debate. Also, thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.